Good afternoon or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. I'm Dr. Adam Reed. I am your chair for this 55-minute webinar on Simply Recycling. Are we ready for rollout? It's an absolute pleasure to invite you and get you to join us on this Suez platform as we investigate and reflect on and look forward to the rollout of Simply Recycling in England, of course. Because in a moment I'm going to introduce one of our panelists who's going to talk about Wales, and they've had something that looks and feels a bit like Simpler Recycling for quite a while. But before I introduce the panelists, let's just think about where we are. It's post-Easter, and local authorities across England are either ready or about to be ready or have plans to be ready for Simpler Recycling. And of course, we knew that many of those authorities were already on that journey long before the legislation took force. So today's session is about understanding readiness. And for those of you that are dialing in, wondering what do I need to do next, hopefully the panel are going to give us a good idea about the things you should be thinking about, the questions you should be asking yourselves, and more importantly, where do you go to get that important piece of information or insight that's going to help you get over whatever hurdles you may be facing. And I guess some of that might be local politics, and some of that might be the availability of all the bins, bags and boxes necessary to get your system up and running, but I won't prejudge those issues. So welcome anyway. Who have we got today? Well, first up, we're going to have Gareth Rollings. Gareth needs no introduction, and he's going to get a brief one, but he is the chair of LARAC, a recently appointed chair, and head of waste at West Sussex County Council. Hello, Gareth. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Adam, and thank you for inviting me along here to talk to everybody today.
That's all right. And how are you finding being the chair of LARAC?
Absolutely loving it. It's been a baptism of fire since the 1st January when I took over from Kathy Cook. Kathy's happy to have moved back into her day job, I think, but she has still been working with me in the background for the last couple of months as we move forward. So yeah, it's been fantastic. I'm really enjoying it.
Fabulous. Thank you. We'll hear from you in a moment. And then we've got James Kay, Director of Resource Efficiency Wales Limited. James, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Adam. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this.
That's my pleasure, mate. You are one of our data experts today. Is that a fair assessment?
I co-run a data business, resource efficient data, with a data analyst. I'm the waster with that data analyst, so I know a little bit about the data. But yeah, that's a fair assumption.
Very good. So it's nice to see you, mate. And I'm not even going to introduce him, but Stuart Hayward-Hyam, Director of Innovation, Technical Development here at Suez, who has been all over this policy space for what seems like an eternity. Stuart, how long have you been bouncing Simpler Recycling around in your your big brain?
Well, if you take it back, probably 2017-18 when we were working around the RWS. So depends how many years you want to go back, Adam. Strangely, I was looking this morning at our 2008 blueprint and our 2012 vision as Suez. So I've been going back. And there were quite a few things that are in Simpler Recycling that we were talking about in 2008 and 2012 as well.
Very good. And today you're going to present a little bit about, I guess, our readiness as a business in supporting our customers in their transition. So thank you for joining us. Right now, setups as per normal. Each of the panelists will be able to present a few slides, set their tone, set the scene, if you like. And then my job is to test them a little bit, bounce some ideas around and get them discussing what I think are the really big issues. So hopefully we'll get as many questions answered as possible in the remaining 50 odd minutes and leave the audience in a better place than we started. So Gareth, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as Adam has said, I'm the head of waste at West Sussex County Council. I'm also now the chair of LARAC. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about LARAC, if that's okay. Let's have the next slide for me, please. So LARAC was formed in 1985, and we represent the local government recycling officers across the whole of United Kingdom. And we are seen as one of the leading voices for local authorities on recycling, waste and resource management. Full membership is open to any local authority, and we currently have 316 members, and it's run by a volunteer group of executives from 27 local authority waste management officers. So what we do is a lot of the pre-work on consultation. So when Adam, you spoke about how far this goes back, yeah, I certainly remember 2018 and getting involved heavily that. So moving into 2026 and seeing some of this now come to fruition is sort of really exciting. I started in Larrikin around 2020, 21 when we had the consultation responses, so I was quite heavily involved in that. So Larrick has had a very big voice in that since the start. Next slide, please. So in terms of local government preparedness, there's obviously been quite a lot going on. So from an operational perspective, most councils, apart from those who had the transition arrangements, all already had food waste. I think it was about 50% had food waste in place and the other 50% didn't. There's obviously a lot of work being done here on modifying collection routes and frequencies, having to order new fleet, new bins, and lots of new recycling materials to make sure that you are doing your service efficiently. One of the biggest things here is around having, very effective resident communication. So there's a lot of materials now being updated from a communication perspective to help residents understand new recycling, what the expectations are, and hopefully to reduce any contamination. So whilst Simple Recycling is fundamentally introducing food waste services and some changes to recycling, it's obviously given a big push to be able to get that communication message out and reaffirm sort of everything that a local authority is now delivering. There's a lot of work going on in terms of collaboration and compliance. So, councils are having to work with their contractors, not only on the sort of the collection side of things, but also with facilities that are having to comply with new regulations and maintain different services. So back at West Sussex, for me personally, this has been a lot of work in terms of converting what was our mechanical biological treatment plant into an anaerobic digestion plant and redoing all my transfer stations. So I'm very proud of my team have just coming off the back end of a 2-year program, and quite a lot of investment into actually doing that piece of work. So, this isn't just a case of put your bins out, we'll collect it, and it moves on. There's been a lot of sort of pre-work done in the background here. And in terms of sort of where councils are now, they're mostly having to grow their workforce. They're looking at how that logistics is working. Depots aren't quite big enough, so there's a lot of work going on. Training of crews, for example, is quite a big piece of that work. There's a whole lot of new people coming into the workforce now. You need to make sure these new containers can be used safely, making sure that their service is efficient, but also making sure that they are compliant. So what has this meant? So infrastructure review. So, they've had to do a lot of assessing of their current services, looking at their fleets, looking at staff levels, looking at their depots, planning for recycling reforms, not just the reforms that are in place now. So for some of us, we will be continuing as we were, and won't be able to change until some long-term disposal and collection contracts come to an end. So, for a lot of us, we've got the eye on now. We've also got the eye on what happens in 2029, 2033, 2035, or even, in my case, sometime up to 2040. That's long-term planning, but actually it takes a lot of time to change what's happening in the waste world, and the speed of things that are changed at the moment and the speed that we can actually react to are two different things. Budgets in terms of councils are very tight, as we know. The good thing is, from the simpler recycling policy, a lot of money's been invested back into local authorities to be able to let them introduce this. But there's also been a lot of money spent on vehicles and new money on staffing, quite a few IT changes. And the communication now is obviously seeing some good money being put into those services, which is really, really positive. In terms of timeline procurement, I mean, this has been, we knew this was coming. Some councils were ahead of the curve, some councils weren't. So, everyone's in a really different space at the moment, and obviously depending on the size of what you're ordering. If you're ordering 100 vehicles as opposed to 20, that's quite a big difference. And some councils are quite big and are ordering big numbers. There's also a lot of work to be done on risk assessment and contingency. So risk assessments, these are different rounds, different vehicles. Some councils haven't used these before. And obviously there's also plans that you have to put in place to have your contingencies and how you maintain a reliable service. Next slide, please. It's just a bit about communications and behaviour change. This is, we are now working in a diverse country. You have a diverse audience, and, I have no doubt that the communications that are being undertaken in the southeast of England, where I work, completely different to what you might be facing in some areas of London, high-rise buildings and flats and stuff like that. Big move now onto digital channels. It's probably been seen as one of the biggest shifts in terms of moving away from printed leaflets to digital channels, but there is still a place for those printed leaflets in the right place. Social media to reach various demographics in terms of groups, young and old, and things like Snapchat and X, or the form Twitter, what it used to be, seems to have fallen away a bit now. But there's still, you've got to put that information out into the right place. I think one of the things I'd like to say on communication as well is this isn't just the communication for now and what happens post rollout. This is thinking about 2 to 3 years ahead now. You need to continue with your communications on food waste, otherwise you're going to see your participation and the amount you're collecting reduce. It has to be a constant message, and this is the right time. You've now got the fundamental starting point of being able to control this. You've got the opportunity now to simplify your recycling communications and instructions. They should be user-friendly materials to help reduce contamination and make recycling accessible to everybody. There's a lot of work now you can do in terms of the community, working with schools and local businesses who are obviously facing some changes on their services as well. And I know that Stuart's going to touch on that. And also working with organisations who have a really big interest now in extending their reach and reinforce that consistent messaging. I think it's also right to say that there's probably some really good feedback mechanisms in place now. You've got in-cab technology, which has sort of moved on so far now that actually been able to tag bins, support households and those that are struggling with the new rules. You should be able to remove quite quickly on that because you've got all the tools available to you. Next slide, please. Risks. Sorry, just go back one. Sorry, that was my fault. Risks and challenges. Obviously, there has been a big procurement and contractual risk in terms of bins and how you get those, and contractual constraints have meant some delays, and there has been vehicle delays that have set some councils back. Necessarily, I've seen my councils here shift dates, 4 or 5 months, and unfortunately what that's meant for West Sussex County Council is about £700,000 additional cost this year based on what we were expecting to have, and now what's going to happen in terms of vehicle delays that have changed month on month. So from a budget perspective, that's really hard. Waste disposal is a big cost, and when things that fluctuate like that and service standards and the reforms don't come in on time, that it really does have a big impact on that. I think there's also quite a big thing here in terms of residents' expectations. Making a change like this to frequency and containers disrupts people's routines, and you will face resistance from residents, and potentially you could face, response back from your workforce who might not like the new changes. And we have seen the impacts of some negative press in terms of, and big press coming back with the stories about how many bins you might get. And I think what the local authorities have done is a really good thing on their communications on things like Facebook and pushback, but also there's been a lot of almost resident self-policing on that now as well, where the first lot of messages are really negative, but actually some other other messages coming from other residents going, well, I've had this for years here, or we had this there, this works really well, how much waste do you produce, and just those sort of messages that come in terms of how you might you've mitigated some of these strategies. I think we got in with contractors early, started those engagements, and also the workforce consultation has been quite good. And I think there's been quite a big phased communication program here. I mean, we certainly in West Sussex, and I know other councils started that messaging sort of end of last year, January, February, drip feeding it through, and then sort of moved on. We had the trade waste stuff come in a year earlier, so some councils have sort of been dealing with what the outcome is of that trade waste service. And again, Stuart, I know you're going to touch on the trade waste a bit more, so I won't go into it in any further detail. Next slide, please. So in terms of are we ready, most councils now done their assessment on readiness. They've done their review, they've evaluated their operational capacity and financial preparedness for their service changes, and they've implemented them, or they're doing them a bit later where the finances didn't quite align or they needed some further funding streams. Some have undertaken operational adjustments, so might have moved from weekly to 2 weekly, have moved from 2 to 3. Certainly, again in West Sussex, one of the things we've seen is the council that didn't have a bin has now introduced a refuse bin, so they've managed to move not only fortnightly, but they've also managed to reduce the bin capacity to 180 litres. So whereas a resident had a 240 litre bin on a weekly basis, 240 litres worth of black bags, 5 black bags a week, they're now going to have a 180 litre bin on a fortnightly basis, which seems to sort of satisfy residents in terms of still giving them that amount of material they need. And everyone's obviously finished off their distribution now and implementing their sort of simpler recycling changes effectively. There has been a lot of collaboration and support here. You know, peer networks, regional groups have given valuable support to benchmark progress and share recycling solutions. There's been a hell of a lot of work done by RAP. Lots of different companies have done lots of different webinars now. So that's obviously really positive. DEFRA have done some work with their preparedness surveys and also their different forums. So there's been a hell of a lot going on. I mean, Larrick's been at the forefront of that, doing lots of work with members and answering lots of questions. And I think to be finally sort of in the stage now of actually delivery is really positive. And I think just in terms of community engagement, I think we have seen a successful recycling transition. You know, it's needed clear planning to achieve that, and it's had to have proactive engagement with residents and partners. You know, so some of the work we're seeing now is, you know, communications and officers out even with residents now in the public, showing off bins, showing off caddies, showing, you know, how to reduce stuff, which is something we probably haven't seen for a good 12, 13 years. That was always one of the first things cut, was communications. So I think we are as ready as we can be. That's my last slide.
Thank you, Gareth. Very positive, which is nice to hear. I think it sounds like West Sussex have kind of got everything aligned, and yes, some delays, but nothing you can't manage around. I mean, with your Larrick hat on, you know, you mentioned vehicles, maybe bins, bags, boxes, you know, all the bits that make this. How much are you hearing from, you know, your brethren in local government that they're just struggling to get all the bits in the right place?
I think it's been overwhelmingly positive. The issues around vehicle delays are, you know, if a vehicle provider's promised you a delivery of X and then ring you up and say, sorry, we haven't got the vehicles, it's now Y, and then ring you up again and say, oh, sorry, it's shifted again. There isn't an awful lot you can do. There isn't an awful lot of hire vehicles out there available. You know, the manufacturers don't have those vehicles, and I think, unlike the old days where you might have said, well, if you don't deliver me that fleet of 10 trucks by X date, you know, I'll charge you, you'll have to pay this for me. Given what's the level of change that's happening, there wasn't many vehicle providers who would have signed up to that level, gone, well, we're not, you know, this council over here is not asking for that, we're not willing to take the risk on it. Yeah. So there isn't an awful lot that can happen. Now, I mean, I think in terms of bins and caddies and stuff like that, I'm not really aware of anyone who's had any major delays in bins coming in. The delays have probably been more about getting them out, because this is a big operation. You know, when you're delivering 200,000 plus items, you know, some councils, so Arran District Council, my area, you know, 75,000 bins, 75,000 internal caddies and 75,000 external caddies. That's a lot of organisation to bring in, to store, to distribute. That's a lot of work on that council's behalf, and it's not their BAU. You know, that's a big project. That's a hell of a big project. So I think it's been, from my perspective and from sort of with my Larrick hat, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. I think we've all done a lot of work on this. I think there's been an awful, and I guess that's a shame of something like this, is there's an awful lot of good government work that's undertaken that, you know, the negative side of it covers up all that good planning and work. You know, my 2-year project to convert my MBT is a major infrastructure project. It's £20 million plus project, you know, but that doesn't make good press. It doesn't make interesting reading for people. It's like, well, the council why the council spent all this money on this project. So yeah, I'm still positive. And I still think we're seeing the good effects of this, and I think we'll see them for the years to come.
Thank you. You set the scene wonderfully, and I share your optimism. I think there's a lot of really good work that's been going on. You talk about collaboration, you talk about guidance, you talk about sharing. I think, you know, the sector has come together to kind of be ready as possible. So, James, let's bring you in. You've been hearing about the English transition, but you sit the other side of Offa's Dyke, of course. How is life in Wales?
Very good, thank you, Adam. Very good. If we go on to next slide, please, I'll speed up so we can get into some good debate. I think that would help. Would that help you, Adam? So who am I? I was that kid that played football at primary school and got annoyed when the other parents told the kids to leave their litter on the playing field because their council will deal with it. And I recognised that when I was 5-6 years old. So I was picking up all those Panda Pop bottles, and I'm still picking it up today. But that sparked something in me, obviously a passion, an interest in litter and natural resources in the environment. I carried that through all the way through my education. When I started looking at higher education in the late 90s, you couldn't do degrees in waste management and the circular economy and life cycle assessment and things like this in the UK. So I had to find some interesting higher education pathways, and I managed to find them. CRWM, bit of a plug, always been a part of my life from university, referencing your good self, Adam, whilst a student, and then actually working for you at a later point in my career. When I finished my masters, something called Recycle Now was launched in 2004 in Suffolk, and there was a guy called Eddie Izzard who faced it up as a big campaign. So I got a job working for Suffolk County Council, and I went bin monitoring, and then I went doorstepping. So I did lots of set out rate monitoring, lots of looking at the data, and then I did lots of talking to people on the curbside about how to improve performance and develop their understanding of things. I moved to Wales, had the opportunity to move to Wales. And then from 2010, I've been the regional waste coordinator for 15 of the 22 councils in Wales, which sits in Resource Efficiency Wales, a community interest company. So councils opt in Wales to fund my role. And I've got a colleague called Victoria Bond who helps me a couple of days a week. And that's Resource Efficiency Wales. We do lots of different things, which I'll cover in a second. Just before the pandemic, I had an itch to scratch, and I thought, I could try and make another business, a profit-making business called Resource Efficient Data. Funnily enough, with one of those kids I played football with at primary school, Steve Hooley. He's a data analyst, I'm a waster. We got our heads together and we managed to make a business. Our first customer was in the first week of lockdown, which was interesting. Right, next slide, please. These are just the logos of the 15 councils I work for in Wales. All of the Valleys councils, lots of the large city councils, and lots of the large rural ones as well. Predominantly my role there is looking after big regional reuse and recycling contracts. So we look after the UK's largest stakeholder contract for textiles at curbside and and batteries, curbside collections. I also do a lot of briefings to staff and members, picking up on what Gareth's mentioned earlier about the importance of communications, not just with operational staff. I actually do a lot of briefings with everybody in a council that touches waste management. So happy to go into detail on that later. Next slide, please. And here are the organisations that have subscribed to Resource Efficient Data. Some very large companies on there and some smaller companies, some based in the United Kingdom, some based abroad. Lots of these organisations use RED for different reasons. They're able to extract high-level data and also granular data. And we've been able to map waste arisings, what's collected in councils across England and Wales using question 100 through to final destination, which is a really cool thing to do if you're interested in the material flow of materials in our economy. Next slide, please. So some thoughts that I can kind of share with you. Okay, clarity kind of beating complexity. Well, first of all, actually, what we did in Wales, we didn't find like a magic system, okay? We made decisions and we stuck to them. And I'm happy to talk about those decisions in more detail as we get to kind of the questions. But essentially, we made decisions, whether they were legislatively or for systems or for outcomes. And we've managed to stick to them for the last 20 odd years. And we've had some good positivity out of it. Clarity does beat complexity. We had a clear direction of travel through legislation that began with devolution. You don't get high levels of performance with constant redesign of a system. You need to design something and then stick with it. So I think that's an important takeaway, perhaps for England. This might be uncomfortable for an English audience. The second point here, targets change behaviour, not guidance. Okay. In Wales, we had targets, like you've got targets in England, but Welsh Government put fines against those targets for failure to meet them. So what it did, it shifted local authority waste managers from the can we do this to how do we do this? And I've spent a lot of time in rooms going, James, help, how do we get another 5%? How do we get another 15%, etc.? Talk about that a bit more later. Simplicity is a performance tool. So this is a nice positive thing in England, I think. When you look at kind of the reforms, it's called simpler recycling. I think that's going to be a big help for you guys. Number 4, food waste. This is the game changer. We all know this, we're all professionals in the waste industry. The biggest element in residual waste is often food waste. It's heavy, it's wet. We've got to get that out. and collect it. In Wales, we have 99.9% weekly coverage of separate food waste collections. Okay, it is interesting. I think that, you know, that job I had in Suffolk in 2004, I was monitoring food waste collections in Suffolk across the various collection authorities, and kind of what happened since then. Number 5, residual waste and the principle of subtraction. Sometimes when you're trying to solve something, it's a good idea to take something away. Let's not add something. Let's not add a service. Let's not add a policy. Let's take something away. So residual waste collections, still quite a good number of councils in Wales collect fortnightly. Some collect 3 weekly, and a couple collect every 4 weeks. So please be aware of that. So it's actually quite surprising. We still have a high number of councils that do fortnightly collections, and we have very high recycling rates. So that's quite interesting. Number 6, it's not about tons, it's about outcomes. You know, very clearly, this is connected to clarity beating complexity as well. In Wales, we've always had a plan of like building infrastructure to match the systems that we collect it to deliver a circular economy and keeping materials within Wales. It's about the final destination. Talk to your off-takers. What specifications, what types of materials do they need, in what condition, and can we collect them in systems that enable that to be kept in use for longer? Number 7, behaviour change. It's not optional. It's completely central. You know, we've not had one-off campaigns. We've had like broad overhead big campaigns and then targeted micro campaigns in Wales. And then finally, there is no silver bullet. You won't find a certain bin type or a collection model or a policy or a vehicle or an in-cab tech or a MRF or a technology or even one person that's going to solve this for you. It's our policy, our targets, our service design, communications, and most importantly, in my view, it's the people in local government delivering these services on the ground. And that's everyone from the driver and the loader through to the telehandler at the HWRCs, all the way through to your press officer that gives out those positive news stories in your local authorities. So we didn't just design a better system, we committed to making it work in Wales. And I'm super glad that I took that opportunity to transfer to Wales from England back in 2006. Next slide. There's my contact details if anyone would like to contact me at any point in the future about anything. Thank you very much. Next slide.
Thanks, James. We'll put the contact details in the group chat so that everybody listening in can follow up with you on why you made the decision to go to Wales when you did, and and what lessons you've learned. Listen, it's always interesting to reflect on Wales, and Andy Rees and I have done it many a time, even on a Suez webinar. You know, he loves the fact that they were a bit more directional. They bought into the long-term transition. It wasn't really optional, and those authorities that tried to opt out eventually had to kind of play nicely because there were funding aspects attached to it. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be interesting in England. You know, how consistent are you, and will you get all of your funding for being effective and efficient? But I guess for me, when I look at Wales, everybody goes, oh, it's easy. It's a small place. You've got a handful of authorities. You know, it's not difficult to control. You know, what is a small county? No disrespect, but you know what I mean. Is that transferable? Can we get that same kind of coordination, collaboration, and direction in a country that historically has been a lot more disaggregated? You look at the number of local authorities in England. You look at the political mix of those. You look at the two-tier system that we've got. Wales is unitary. There's so many things that make local government coordination harder, I would say, for Gareth than perhaps in your part of the world.
Yeah, and you've almost answered that question with your reply there. But yeah, you know, Wales, for your audience, we've got 22 councils. They're all unitaries, so responsible for collection, disposal. That's a massive help when you're trying to like work with a workforce and design communications for the public. I think the way local government is structured in England is quite tricky about how you're going to manage this specifically with communications for number one. So in terms of like what's transferable, I mean, I would say there is, when you look at the data, I think there's a reasonable possibility of almost twinning where some English unitary councils are now to where Welsh councils were 8 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. When you look at the data on a dashboard, you can benchmark it against it. And RED allows customers to do that. You can benchmark performance going back several years. So, you know, I don't know if anyone's ever looked at that in England at kind of a policy level, like the actual unofficial twinning of the position of where a council in England is and where a Welsh one is and where they got to in their journey, because that'll be quite interesting to look at, I think.
I like that suggestion, because I know we talk about family groups and in English local authorities and similar services and the progress that they might make because they're benchmarking against themselves, but actually benchmarking against what you might call best practice from, you know, 6 or 7 years of progress and going, well, that's what we could achieve. Because blanket targets, I think, can be a bit of a red herring in large geographies with lots of, you know, moving pieces.
And Adam, just, and I'll let, obviously you're going to spin on to the next speaker, but I would make the point that the last set of figures that are publicly available, 24-25, 2 of the top 3 councils, one of them collects TwinStream, and one of them collects TwinStream on an alternate week system. So they're not necessarily, well, they're not definitely following the collections blueprint model. So there is very high success in Wales on a system that England is trying to design with simpler recycling. Okay, so, you know, Monmouthshire, Swansea Council, they're very different systems to other places. So it's proven that it can work because it's in the data. So, you know, it goes back to my point that I made at the end about there isn't a silver bullet. You're not going to like, this can't be transformed with one thing. You know, a technology is not going to be the answer. This is a suite. But I think the key difference is in England, in Wales, is that we've had legislation and targets and a direction. You know, we're trying to achieve a zero waste nation by 2050. You know, I've spent 20 years living and working in Wales, and crikey, we're up at 68 something odd % as a country now for municipal solid waste. You know, waste arisings are coming down and down every year, but it's getting harder and harder because people's habits are changing about what we buy and drink and use and what have you at home. So the need for constant refinement of communications is always happening. And you know, yeah, I am still training new staff how to go out, set out rate monitoring in the year 2025 in Wales, because it's key to us maintaining that 70% performance level or trying to get to it. Okay, so I'm still training people on a regular basis how to do this, refresher training and new staff, so they can go out and be the doorsteppers of 2025.
And I guess, you know, you and I go back 25 years when doorstepping was all the rage, because you were one of my crew. But it's interesting, isn't it? You've come back to 2 things: behaviour and data that helps you understand behaviour. And I think that's a perfect segue into Stuart, because Stuart and I are forever talking about data, because he has more of it than I can cope with, and behaviour, because that's our job, isn't it? It's to help people make better decisions to get to the the promised land, if you like. So Stuart, welcome. You've listened to Gareth and James. They've set the scene beautifully. We're not here talking about the fundamentals of 4 bins or not. We're talking about hearts and minds, by the sounds of it, and the data to underpin that. This must be music to your ears.
Talk about a system. Although just to be provocative, James has got it easy because Welsh authority data is the best that we have in the UK, and Gareth's just talking about 75,000 rollouts. That's nothing compared to what we've got in business. So just to be cheeky. But no, good. Right, next slide, please, for me. So I think first one is simple recycling is one of many different things. We've got lots going on. We've got the new packaging EPR system. We've got the deposit return scheme in that process. We've got lovely digital waste tracking overlaying with that as well. And we've got the circular economy plans when we can get into detail of those. So quite a lot of activity. So you have to look at simple recycling within that, as you do have to do with the blueprint and the charter in that process. So next slide, please. So what was, in my view, what was simple recycling trying to do? It was trying to, apart from get the label off the screen, and my screen at least, it was trying to make collection simpler to understand, so that the same materials were being collected for the same purpose in any authority, It wasn't about bin colours, it wasn't about bin sizes, because you can't really do that. Coming back to James's point is, authorities are different. If you're in an inner city urban area, you can't provide the same bin sizes and other things as you can do elsewhere in the country. So it's about consistent materials that can be recycled. I think one of those things that it emphasises on in terms of collection maybe misses a few things with regards to best choices for packaging. And I think we're going to have to eke that out over time. So sometimes the easiest way to collect it is not necessarily the best way for quality or quantity on the outcome. And I think some of the process of efficient and effective in packaging will have to challenge, I think, the collection systems in all of the national authorities to see what the right answer is for each packaging format through that process. So next slide, please. And to give you a few examples, so obviously here's a bag collection. So Simple Recycling says you must have a weekly food collection. Hasn't really, or didn't really think about the complexities of how to do that when you're doing bag collections in the city areas. Are we putting a bag of food out? Are we providing a caddy? How do we do that when you're only allowed a certain amount of time to put your bins out, etc.? And to be honest with you, the industry is still working with the regulator and DEFRA to understand exactly how that's going to work. So you can see that some of these things are actually quite complex when you get into the detail of how this translates into a particular activity in that process. And obviously counting bags, making sure the service is convenient, but doesn't chocker the footways of the cities with bins that you have to then walk in the road and add that danger. So next slide, please. And the other thing it didn't consider necessarily is how multi-bin collections, so source eggs, etc., how they work within the system in that process, even down to the simplicity of a truck, a source egg truck coming in that's got dry recycling in different components and got food on board as well. When it goes into a facility, is a general waste lorry, because it's got mixed materials in separate compartments but mixed on the truck. And I talked to Andy about that in terms of how the data records that, because it makes it difficult then to see that you've got separate materials coming in that process, but also how source egg helps deliver different outcomes in different places in that process, and how it can be a very good way into recycling and behaviour change. I think is one of the things that we miss when you have to put your bins out in a very obvious way. You learn very well. I think the key one, Adam, you and I both reside in Warwick District. We were source egg, went to commingled. It wasn't a surprise to me when Sean Murph said that the best recycling area was Warwick District, because I think they trained the residents historically and they carry that training forward. I know from my neighbours the angst was, but how do they get the right quality and how do they do this in the Murph in that process? Because you've got people that have concern. Next slide, please. So going into behaviours, I always bring up my, because I love it, is the 590s. 90% of the people doing 90% of the right things 90% of the time, and 90% of the material passing through the collection and sorting phase and 90% passing through the recycling phase gives you about 60% recycling. So you need excellent performance, and you can't fail on the first three. First three, get it wrong, you don't get the material in the right bin, it never ends up at the latter two bits. But also, and again, this is where I'm slightly jealous of local authorities, because they have people that focus on particular communities. The rollout for simpler recycling, less than 10 FTE micro businesses, is somewhere between 2 and 3 million for April next year. That's a challenge, and that's an audience that's not had any communication yet, apart from a little bit on social media. Whereas Wales, when it rolled out its business services, had a national campaign, etc. So how can you be compliant when you don't see it? When you're running a small business and you're worrying about where the next pay rise is, where your tax return, etc. It's not going to top of your list to be looking at things like that. So that's where we as a business and others are trying to communicate out. But if I take the first round of communication that we did for the larger businesses, You also need government to back you up, because a lot of people said, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Where does government say it? And we had to work with RAP and government to actually make something where we could point them to and say, look, it says over there. I think one of the challenges we've got to come to is that we are making business waste recycling more expensive. Packaging EPR pays for local authorities to do the additional services, and there'll be an argument to whether they pay enough or not, but there's a fair transfer of money. Businesses don't get that, so their compliance is basically on the stick because there is no carrot. At the same time, DRS will take out the two most valuable products, aluminium and PET plastics, from their bins, which means that where we subsidise them at the moment with that money, we won't have the same level of subsidisation in the future. The new materials, cartons and flexible plastics, are a net cost. They don't really have a value at the other end. So they add cost to the service in that process. And limited visibility, you know, in the way that James was talking about targets. Really important that businesses know what they have to do, why it's important, context is valuable, but also what happens if they're not compliant. At the moment, as I understand it, technically they're not compliant until they've had their first enforcement notice. So we're very reliant on digital waste tracking, being able to help them understand what's required and leaving the business with a level playing field, not allowing people to come in and sell under compliant services for a period until such time as they're told otherwise. Next slide, please. And Gareth relates to this, you know, you just look at the food waste logjam. So in April 25, we had to roll out to all the bigger businesses. That was a big old rollout across the sector. And we were trying to communicate, because there hadn't been national comms in that way, why it was necessary, why they had to actually bid, the change in services, etc. Then we have next month, most local authorities rolling out, not all. Some are already there, some have got a delay allowed. And then in between that, after that, you've then got the small businesses, the 2 or 3 million locations we have to roll out. So we were buying trucks early and bins, and then local authorities came into market for buy theirs and that process. We're now looking to buy bins and trucks to deal with the next rollouts, competing with local authorities who are trying to buy their bins and trucks. It's a lot to ask the supply chain to supply all of that over 3 years, and many millions of households and businesses all having to have different services in that process. So there are overlapping procurements, there are supply challenges, and I think in hindsight's always perfect, so we can always refer to that. Maybe there should be a bit more consideration about how to roll this out in a way that works. And I know the reason to split it was to kind of even that, but if the truck takes 18 months to deliver, it's quite hard. It's also about certainty to make things happen. So next slide, please. And then, of course, we've not finished, because we've got simple recycling, we've got EPR, which is still working its way through the system, we've got DRS coming October 27, and we've got the circular economy growth plan, which we're looking at other materials and also looking at how we reduce and reuse in that process. So it won't even be static. It won't be that we roll it out and we can put our feet up and relax. We've got the next set of overlapping things to put in place. So it is on a journey, and it's a very complex system, but there's some very good people and very good data now coming out of the system, which is helping us understand the best way to deliver services and make the system work. That's me done. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. So how difficult are we finding it with bags, bins, boxes and vehicles in particular, both in terms of supporting our local authorities, but as you say, that transition to, you know, the private sector more generally as a customer set?
So I think, coming back to Gareth's point, you know, the headline that says 99.9% of all bins were collected successfully today doesn't really grab any headlines in that process. So in the vast majority, services are rolled out. We've been through that with the customers. There's a lot of work going on the nuance. You know, we've had a whole pile of discussion with the veterinary regulators, as well as the environmental regulators, around how we deal with food waste in transfer stations and stuff. And we've had to go through a process of working out what the right answer is. So there's lots of actually deep dives in certain bits. You know, I mentioned earlier the ongoing discussions around what's the best way of collecting food waste that doesn't leave it open to foxes, gulls, and everything else that's running around the street, depending how you present it out in very urban areas where bags are used. And I think there's some learnings and some other activities need to be going. But I think generally it's gone okay. I think the big thing for me that's missing, and I know DEFRA have a very different opinion to me on this, is a national visibility campaign. This is changing. This is what's going on, and not just in social media. I think it needs to be on billboards and radios and other bits and bobs. And you can see what happens when you get that in what we've seen with national crime, and the focus that crime has been given in the public as well as in the regulators and government, from just having it in the national press. And I think that's something we're missing in England.
Well, I wouldn't disagree. And I remember sitting down with DEFRA several years ago talking about how you rolled this out to business more generally. And I said, well, unless you've got an advert on TalkSport and it's on billboards on every high street, you're going to miss a huge swathe of people that are in and run businesses. And yet they didn't take that as positive criticism. And I guess, James, you mentioned Eddie Izzard, who's a bit of an icon, because we're all kind of a certain age here, aren't we? We can remember, the possibilities are endless. I mean, Wales has done a good job with that in terms of having a consistent Welsh level set of messaging that's been, there for a number of years.
Yeah, I think so, because it's been proven in the data. But I'm minded to think about just cash here. A few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I'm sure there was a public statement where essentially Welsh government has spent about £1 billion in the last 20 years on infrastructure, capital investment for a country, the size of Wales. And that's all to deal with municipal solid waste. So, England is roughly 20 times the size, let's say roughly. So where's your £20 billion investment for the next, well, it sounds like next 3 years you need it. You need it immediately. But, it doesn't lie, does it? You need the investment in infrastructure and vehicles and treatment plants. And it's quite interesting. Well, many of the comments are interesting. Food waste. How do you deal with it at waste transfer stations? Right. So obviously across Wales, we've got urban, rural, and valleys councils. So we've got the whole mix there. We're collecting it. We're all unitaries. We've got all our waste transfer stations. English councils can definitely learn from what we've done. We've been doing it for years and years and years. So I would reach out to me. I can link you up with my colleagues. We are proud to share what we've done, why we've done it, and how it looks, etc.
There's an offer we can't refuse, Jack.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, documentation, the simple thing like risk assessments and what have you. And I find it quite interesting, like when the early days when food waste was maybe collected on a split back, and you could tip off the food waste separately, and then you'd know that exact tonnage. And if you'd done some monitoring on that round, you had some really powerful data on kilograms per participating household, for example.
Yep.
What happens now, I think, unfortunately, in Wales on the segregated vehicles, and England's going to end up with some of these as well, is that all the materials are segregated. They're taken to a waste transfer station. It's weighed in on the way in, so the overall weight. Then all the materials are taken off. They're not weighed individually. And then when those materials leave the waste transfer station a week later, it balances out. What's left, the whole waste transfer station, added up against all the vehicles that have gone in. So when you go out and do some nice bit of targeted monitoring, whether it's food waste, whether it's cardboard, whatever, whether it's separate glass collections, you then can't identify that tonnage against that collection round. I think that's a real problem. You can do it simply if you just run the vehicle over twice and take the food waste off, and then take the rest of the materials off the second time. But trying to convince operational guys to do that for the love of some data to use for targeted communications, that's a battle in itself. Okay, so it really is. It really is. It takes an extra 2 minutes to do that. Ooh.
Yeah. Well, Stuart and I forever bang heads with operational staff about the value of doing something versus the time to do something. Gareth, I mean, so far I've had 2 panelists telling me that we need some national campaigning and we need to go big. I can't imagine you're going to tell me we don't need to, but the local flavour's got to fit in there as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most difficult bit here, is how do you balance up what's needed locally against what's needed regionally and then even nationally. So I think the England side of things are taking it out of like Wales, and that is we've got so many different local authorities doing collections with so many different political parties that actually trying to get those decisions through are so difficult. Councils would wed for such a long time on a weekly service as opposed to a 2 weekly, as opposed to moving 3 weekly. And then on the infrastructure side, it's very difficult because there's all the goodwill in the world. If we got the money to build a new infrastructure project tomorrow, it would probably still take us 3 to 6 years. By the time you've gone through the local internal governance, got it all set off, when you then find somewhere to put it, you then go against the residents who don't want it in their backyard. So it takes years. So you're in this sort of fundamental process where it almost feels like we're in this like real, I would say not the circular, but circular sort of issues where the infrastructure's not there, then becomes a transport problem, and it just works its way around in this big circle, and nothing ever is able to be produced on it. So, the infrastructure sort of surveys will always show their space for material, but actually when you start looking at it, what it comes down to is, that depends on how far you're willing to transport it. And that's what's killing local authorities is from the disposal perspective, a lot of this is the cost of transporting waste all over the place. It's very, very expensive. But I sort of share Stuart's frustration. We've been speaking to the relevant bodies around sort of like how you deal with nuances and differences. I mean, I've been working with the ESA around on-demand food waste collections, places like Westminster, for example. The response back is very much, we need to do a weekly collection. And it's like, well, even when they're trying to sort of like think outside the box and do something different, the response back from regulation is, no, you must do this. And that's not really helpful because everyone is so different. You do need different services at different times. But yeah, I don't envy trying to roll that business way side of things out, that many businesses. And I know how difficult it is just trying to roll that service out just internally to my buildings and my schools, and all the questions that come back. And again, how much is this going to cost? It's a lot of money. So I would like to see a national campaign. Do I think there will be one? I'm not convinced there will be. There does need to be one, because I can't see local authorities running trade waste services are the right people to be doing that. And I don't think businesses who have to sort of deliver that news to their customers, almost a bit like, you need to do this, it's going to cost you more money, but by the way, someone else is probably going to come along and speak to you and tell you not to worry about it, and they'll do it cheaper. And it's not helpful for anybody really, I don't think.
That's quite interesting, Adam, if I can jump on that. So the councils that fund my role, 15 of them, they are essentially the largest provider of trade waste services in their council areas. Might be 10%, might be 20%, and the rest of the market is made up of lots of smaller private companies. But councils are the largest provider. Some of the vehicles that are set up for municipal solid waste curbside collections might be on segregated recycling, so it works quite well. They're transferable, but it's I think it's important not to pass away too much, Gareth, into the private sector in terms of trade waste, because there's an important message there, I feel, that councils have with their controlling the messages perhaps at home at the curbside, but also what people do in the workplace. And Wales has tried to do that as well, so that you're replicating what you do in the workplace is what you do at home, which I believe has worked quite well over the last couple of years for businesses. But Stuart's point as well, NRW, our regulator in Wales, they recruited, trained and used a dozen staff to go around businesses in the regions of Wales and engage with businesses to get them ready for workplace recycling reforms in Wales. And I understand nothing like that has happened in England through the Environment Agency, which is a huge shame. It's a huge shame, as highlighted in Stuart's presentation. You've got massive gaps, millions of businesses gaps, haven't you?
I think if you do national campaign, you're talking to the same person that's a citizen, an employee or an employer.
Yes.
And effectively, you're sending a message. And I think it's not about communicating to municipal or business. It's about communicating to the individual and going, it doesn't matter where you are at work, or if you're the employer or you're the citizen. This is what we're changing. This is why we're changing. And I think why is really important. Most behaviour change is driven by the why. Why is this important? Yeah. And asking them to look for those changes appearing in the business. And then when the person turns up and says, "Oh, I can do a cheap service, mate, and we won't do this and the other," you'd be able to go, "Well, actually, that's not right." you need to provide this. We had some very, very good examples of rollouts for simple recycling where the Association of Convenience Services did a really good pack on what you have to do as a convenience store effectively. We had others that were still saying that there was a 5 kg limit in England, and there was no limit in England, whereas there is in Scotland and Wales. And therefore customers were receiving different information from different trusted or what they thought were trusted services, and therefore because they could hear a message from us, a message from somebody else that was different, they were looking to government to go, and what is the real answer? Not the regulations or the policies or even the guidance. A really simple page that says, if you're a business, you should be having these types of really simple services that's got a government label on it that says this is official. And then everybody can point them to it and go, this is the answer. All your contractors, all your tenderers should be applying these same rules to you. And make it simple. We try to make collection simple. We haven't really done comms to help land that in a simple way, I think.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick fire round, or a couple of quick fire rounds, because we're near the end of this session. So I want to get everybody on their toes. In terms of compliance, by the end of year, let's say 1, so 1 being it's just started, you've got 365 days from there. How compliant do you think England will be in terms of switching to simpler recycling? I'm going to include food waste rollout. So we started at about 60%, had food waste. By the end of the year, where are we going to be at, Gareth, Stuart, and James? What would you expect us to be at, given the Welsh kind of transition, if you like? So, Stuart, you go first, because I know you've been modelling numbers. 60% to what? Are we going to get to 70 or 80? Throw me a number.
Just municipal or municipal and business?
Just municipal for the moment.
Just municipal. We should be somewhere around 80, I think.
Okay, Gareth?
Yeah, I was going to say 80 to 90%.
Okay.
I think it depends how much you read into simple, because obviously simple recycling isn't just food. There's other bits about how you separate out, which a lot of councils won't be doing. Yeah.
Another question on that one. James, is 80 to 90%, does that sound reasonable?
It sounds reasonable and it sounds achievable, but it's one thing to provide a service. You've got to have people to use it. And much like Stuart's stats, a wise man once said to me, you need 100% of the people recycling 90% of the materials 80% of the time. So,
It was a wise man, that fella.
It was a wise man. But it's quite important 20 years ago to say that to a Welsh audience, because that's the reality of how we got to 70%. It's tricky.
Okay, so I'll take the point about compliance of everybody as read. That is a tough gig. A few people have been asking, a load of the audience, always twisting my arm, sending me emails, God knows what else. Are we ready with all of this food waste processing capacity, Stuart? I know this is something you've been modelling a lot. Is that going to be in place? Because if that other 30% of authorities have suddenly got food waste coming, as James alluded to, that's a big chunk of your residual bin. So I'm expecting this to be a few loads. How much of that extra tonnage is going to have the capacity in place within the next, let's say a year or 18 months?
All right, so technically there is enough capacity for all the tonnage. Practically, it's not all in the right place, and that's the problem. And I think if you look at Wales set about providing national capacity that's nationally achievable from a centralised way of working. In England, it's the operators, the authorities, and others that are required to do the work to work out where to put material. And then if you look at RAP and DEFRA's modelling, there's a big challenge coming, because although we have capacity now, there's an end of incentive cliff edge that's been proposed, which says at the end of RHI, etc., then there might be a loss of capacity of a couple of million tonnes. So we're also looking at today and tomorrow, I think. But yeah, today, enough capacity, not all in the right place, unfortunately.
Thank you. And then my last quick fire one, I think this is one for you, Gareth. If to your local authority peers who maybe aren't going to be compliant in the next year or two, what's your advice to them?
Speak to the people that have done it and are doing it, and get yourself there, because if you don't do it, it's not going to make enough difference, and everyone needs to sort of pull part of this weight and needs to work together to get it delivered with all the stakeholders that are in place and speak to the right people to get it moving.
And of course, James would say the art of the possible is evident, and he's got the data to back it up. So if in doubt, have a look at those that have gone before. Right, my time is up. The panel, you've been fantastic. Some great insight, some thought-provoking conversation, and one or two pointers about direction of travel. Hopefully, we've answered a lot of the questions that have been on people's minds. I'm going to leave you one final task before we go, though. And as you know, I have a recycled T-shirt that I wear a lot, and on it I have a hashtag which summarises the key message that's come out of the session today. So, in time-honoured tradition, Stuart, what is my hashtag that tells me my takeaway message?
Good data drives good performance.
Hashtag good data drives good performance. Now, James, he's stolen all your best lines. So, hashtag.
Hashtag future generations.
Oh, just Mr. Positive as always. And Gareth, hashtag.
Hashtag think longer term.
Oh, love it. Love it. Listen, guys, you've been fantastic. Thanks very much. I'm going to take away hashtag the opportunities are endless. Long live Eddie Izzard. I've been Dr. Adam Reid. I am the Chief External Affairs Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer at Suez. Thank you to Stuart, James and Gareth. If you're struggling with your rollouts, if you don't know which way is up, find an expert or ask those that are out there at the moment offering advice. There's plenty of good examples that you can go and tap into. So I'll see you on a future webinar, if not in a workshop near you soon. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.